Hey folks, this is Totally and welcome to another game. We're gonna restart. We're gonna try that again. Hey folks, this is Totally and welcome to another Game Dev Sunday. We're coming back here and jumping back in with some more game dev work. So when we last left off, we were looking at adding this stagger bar underneath the enemies, which I'm actually pretty happy with. We kind of threw it together relatively quickly and prototyped it, and I've been exploring it a little bit more, playing, and I found that I think this is the direction I want to continue with. At least for the time being, we should continue to just like see where this goes. But I'm liking the kind of extra mechanic it's adding to kind of timing your attacks versus the enemies and being able to stagger the enemy and then perform like a big hit to take them out. I'm liking that direction. There's still some more stuff to play with, and actually for the first time in a while I actually was so excited about stuff that I actually found some time to work on the game in between our Sunday game dev streams. Normally too busy, but we've modified this screen. Some stuff is out of alignment, but I'm not super concerned about that right now. The bigger thing is I got it so that we can actually show the other nodes and have them being displayed. So we can't click on them, but this is where we will unlock later skills. So if I work my way through this skill tree, eventually I unlock Venom Slash, which is then this tree that I can go into, and it appears on this list once this one is finished. So that's been a little bit of work that I've been doing. I've also made it so that the skill points for everything within this tree is all shared. So every time you use the slash ability, it will give you skill points towards using in this tree, but it also give you points for leveling up the Venom Slash ability as well. So a little bit of work being done there off camera. The other thing is if I hit shift right now, we can see that I have these areas here become blank. If I reload the map, it'll recognize that I have unlocked that Venom Slash. And then if I hold shift again, we can see Venom Slash, although the text is overflowing, is appearing on this A button. So the idea will be that each of these like next tier level down abilities won't replace these 4 primary toolkit ones, but instead you'll be able to hold like left bumper on a controller. For now it's shift on the keyboard. But you'll be able to hold that key and then choose one of these upgraded skills. These skills will also cost MP. We're still figuring that system out. In the current UI Drixie has made, we have like these 6 segments, and I'm currently, right before starting stream, I was exploring setting it up so that these segments could each represent about 100 MP worth of progress. Let me see if I can show that real quick. So if I click on this and then modify the fill amount, we can see that that amount of fill is changing. The idea would be that we're looking at having some amount of mechanics, whether that's moving or staggering an enemy, something that you do in the game, or maybe multiple things that you do in the game, are going to increase this mana bar. And when this mana bar gets all the way full, I'm trying to figure out a way to set it up, which shouldn't be too hard, it's just taking a bit of time, to have it swap over to a different texture. So it goes from that cracked look to like a more full, filled in kind of effect. And then the idea would be that these abilities here that we're using wouldn't cost any time. So normally when we perform an attack, like slash takes 3 turns to execute. And if the enemy is taking a turn, they might be able to perform an attack before we even get to finish. So I could try and attack this enemy, but he's going to move and I'm going to miss. But the idea would be that these abilities on the right bumper are more powerful and they cost these gems essentially. So this might cost 1 gem, but it's an instant attack. Right now it's still using 3 CT because I'm in the middle of kind of revamping some of that, but that's the general premise that we're moving towards. And I think that that's going to create an interesting kind of experience between this base toolkit of slash to build up stagger and bash to kind of like hit the enemy and weaken them, and then defend to try and like block damage slash parry if you can time your defend correctly. And then we're also like I said, looking at this secondary ability set that will use the gems, and as you stagger and move around, you'll build up more of these and be able to use these powerful attacks occasionally. There's going to be some balancing there, obviously, to make sure that they're not too abundant, but also not too rare. So that's kind of where we're at, just a bit of a catch up in between last stream and this stream. For today, though, I'm going to kind of put some of that stuff I'm just showing in the back burner, and we're going to look at some NPC event stuff. So I'm calling it NPC events, but I'm still trying to figure out what this is myself. So we're going to open up this scene. Let's go over here to scene view. Let's get out of 2D mode. Now, I have a bunch of these gems I've been meaning to turn off for a while. These blue gems here are start reveal tiles. I'm going to toggle those off before we start. Make sure to save. So this scene in particular is a really important one for us. This is going to be like establishing in chapter 1 the player's like primary motivation, or at least one of their primary motivations. And the idea is that when you get to here, we're going to have these tiles reveal, and this adventurer is going to ask for help. And Hero is going to try and find a way around. And from the player's point of view, they're going to end up having to leave south of here. It's the only route out, and the player is going to end up looping all the way around and coming in from the north of this room, and we'll be able to find that the adventurer has basically died while they were moving all the way around. But because of the time loop nature of our game, the player will have an opportunity to retry and eventually figure out how to save this adventurer. Now, that all being said, one thing I'd like to have happen here is I'd like to have it so that when you're moving through here, it's not actually in combat. Because what I'm simulating right now is having combat actually being like active, but the boar has no way of reaching the player, and the player has no way of reaching the boar. And so because of that, we end up in this situation where the player is basically stuck having to move as if this was a combat encounter, even though technically there's no combat you can be doing with the enemy. So what I'd like to do is I'd like to have some sort of system where we can move around essentially normally as if combat wasn't happening. And in fact, it won't be. So basically I should be able to move like this freely, and simultaneously the boar should be attacking that adventurer, and that adventurer should be blocking those attacks. And that's going to be a bit tricky. So we're going to have to do a little bit of digging to try and figure out how we're going to set that up. The boar itself is an enemy, and that enemy is being spawned immediately. I guess the first thing we need to track down is where is combat being triggered to? Because normally you can have an enemy spawned in a map without combat being started. So if we come back over to this map, the room right before that one, and I come into the board and debug spawn all, so all the tiles are turned on, I can walk around and that enemy won't actually trigger combat until it sees me. So where does the actual combat is active happen? So if we look at the combat state machine, specifically the infinite retries version, we are looking for combat start. Let's add a breakpoint in here and see if we can get an idea in the call stack of where combat is beginning to. I'm also going to zoom in here. We're going to get rid of all of our previous breakpoints. Let's go back into Visual Studio real quick. And we're going to, yeah, okay, that is the only one left. Good. So if we walk up to here, right, we're going to get a small cutscene warning us not to go that way. We're going to ignore that cutscene and walk up anyways, and we're going to get combat started. Now this is on the enemy entering its attack state. So once the enemy has entered attack, we say combat is started. Now inside of the spot call, that's what's actually pushing us into the attack state. And we call this as part of a unit site effect. So the enemy is basically looking and checking the tiles around it, and if it finds that this specific tile that it's checking in front of it has the opposite alignments or an alliance that is not its own, then it's going to tell itself to, it's going to say it's spotted the enemy and push itself into the attack state, and that will trigger the combat state machine, and then we'll get into the state where we're kind of stuck moving one tile at a time. That all being said, how is that happening for the boar? I'm going to guess that the NPC that we set up is of a different alliance, and therefore the boar sees the NPC and starts combat. So this is Adventurer 001 container. So this is a unit. Does it have a alliance? It does not, but it may be getting generated inside of the NPC state beta, which is kind of a temporary class that has become less temporary over time. Yeah, and it is choosing to have an alliance of hero. So if we instead give it a alliance of enemy, so that it is of the same type as the boar, I think we will not have combat start. And because this is an NPC and not an enemy, the NPC won't try and fight us either. It will just stand there. Okay, so then we'll walk forward. We'll trigger the cutscene. All right, and now we are not in combat, which is what I wanted, but there's kind of a secondary problem, which is that I still want there to feel like there's a fight happening here. And so I think I want some sort of system where if we're not in combat, that I can provide my NPCs or even enemies with a set of behaviors that I would like it to do beyond its normal patrol. Because if we go back to this one here, which I don't think I toggled off the spawn all, when I'm moving around, the enemy is taking actions normally, but those actions are usually patrolling between a couple of different points. Oh, we did turn off the spawn all. I guess I just didn't save it, which makes sense. Environment, board, spawn all. When I walk around, the enemy is just moving, which means that it is establishing plans. Those plans just happen simultaneously with the player. Okay, well maybe we start there. Let's see how that system works. Let's do a little bit of digging. And we're going to look at the AI director, which is in charge of having the AIs perform actions. And it asks the faux state machine to update its current state, and then it's going to ask the state machine what its next plan of attack is. If we look here, this plan of attack is encapsulated here and then used in a couple of different spots. A lot in the attack state, but there is one spot it is used inside of the patrol state. And this says I would like to plan to move towards a specific tile, which is going to be the next tile in its patrol path. Okay. So in theory, we could have other states beyond just patrol. And we could start the enemy in some sort of like theatrical state in which it tries to perform a series of actions that I've prescribed. In our current scenario, that action would mostly just be attacking the enemy, but it's going to be like a pretend attack. It won't be like a real fight. But this doesn't really help the NPC, because the NPC has no concept of... It has no concept of existing within the AI director. Yeah, we instantiate the NPC prefabs, we initialize them, but we don't really register these with anything. Whereas if we look at the enemy manager, I'm pretty sure that this eventually hands this information off to our state machine. This get units call. Yeah, this gets passed into our ability target manager, which is in charge of doing some complex or some more elaborate targeting systems. So if we want to target things within specific ranges, this ability target manager can help with that. Not really important for what we're talking about today. And then it passes the units from the enemy manager into the combat state machine along with the unit for the player state. Because right now we only have a single unit that will ever exist with the player. We never have a team. We only have you controlling a single character, so we only pass in a single unit. In theory, we could spawn multiple units and have you control multiple units, but I haven't really fully brute force tested that or anything. It's just built to work, but I imagine it would be super buggy and require a fair amount of work to get fully functional. Okay, so we're passing in the enemies and we're passing in the player, but we don't pass in the NPCs. So if I want to have something control the NPCs, I would need to pass that into here, but does this even make sense? Like, this is for combat. This is the combat state machine. It kind of doesn't, kind of doesn't. It, at some point, the combat state machine has really become more of a manager for anything that happens in the game. Whenever something happens within discrete turns, which is pretty much all movement and actions, it happens within the state machine. So even when we're not in combat and the enemy's patrolling around, technically the combat state machine is still managing that unit's patrols. I mean, the AI director manages it, but the combat state machine is managing the player and the AI director. Okay. Hydrate from unlockable characters on Twitch. Appreciate the hydrate. Okay, let's figure out the NPC second. Let's focus on just the enemy, which is already being controlled in a way that should be easily expandable. So, how do we want to do this? Let's explore the idea of there being another state for the enemies. Right now they enter into the patrol state. Let's see what happens if we give them a theatrical state, is what I'm going to call it. How do we currently choose its initial state? Is it just defaulting into patrol? It does look that way. It looks like when we initialize the state machine, it just chooses to go into patrol immediately. Okay. Let's assume that remains true. What are these other states used for then? Are they used at all? This one has no references. The spot state does get used. We enter into the spot state from the idle, and the idle is something we enter into from patrol. Okay, so once we reach a patrol point, we go into an idle state for a number of turns, and while we're idling, we can spot the player. And while we're in patrol, we can also spot the player. And if either of those things happen from idle or from this one, we'll go to the attack state. But it looks like the return state is something I set up but didn't end up using. So this is mostly a dead class. Spot state is something we go to after idle just as a single turn to say, hey, we want to try looking, and then we go back to patrolling. Okay. So if we make a new state, which I'm going to base off of idle, because it shouldn't need to do a ton of work, so we'll take a simple one. We're going to copy that and paste it. Oh, we can't do that while we're debugging. Okay, stop debugging. We're going to paste this one, and we're going to name this faux theatrical. That's wrong. We're going to use Google to save us. Theatrical. Okay. Capitalize and get rid of the copy. And while within the state, let's assume we do nothing for now, and we have no way of exiting this state on our own. Well, maybe we should leave the spot exit as well. Oh, it updated, and I no longer have any undos. Copy this part. So we'll say that we can still leave if we spot the player. Okay. How would we get into this theatrical state? This base, this is doing nothing, but it might do something eventually, so I'm going to leave it for the time being. Well, we entered into... Okay, how do we get here? We enter into the spot state through the faux state machine, having a function that can be called. If we scroll up, I think we passed it. Yeah, here we can enter into the attack state remotely. Can we do the same thing with the theatrical state? So we're going to do enter theatrics. And that should be able to change us from whatever state we're currently in into this one. Okay. I'm still not sure where I'm going with this, to be perfectly honest with you. But I'm going to continue to just see where it leads. This might be entirely the wrong direction. But I am curious. So if we go to the cutscenes, which are not going to be in scripts, they're going to be somewhere in here. Sequences? Nope, those are old ones. Dungeon? Oh, we're in the JRPG. That's the problem. We want to be in here. Close out this screen section. Close the front end. Close all the scripts. And then from here, we want to look at the cutscenes folder. Forest. No. Woods. And G7. Trapped Adventurer. This is the cutscene that starts that dialogue with the help, and I'll find a way around. So I think we could add another sequence step in here that triggers that enemy to go to the theatrical state and tells it to do some behavior. I think the problem I'm trying to get past, though, is how do we deal with the fact that we're going to have different enemies potentially wanting different types of behaviors? Like, we could have a hard-coded setup here where we tell the enemy to go to theatrical state, and we can set it up so that it will try and find the NPC, or even just attack a specific tile with, like, a special ability that is going to trigger parry. Like, it will automatically parry with this special theatrical attack. But that may not be the behavior we always want. So really, because the enemies are generic and we don't want to have to make a new enemy every time we want to create some sort of special behavior for it, I think we want to have some way of telling the enemy what its plan or what its script is from the spawner. So at the point where we're going to spawn this enemy on this game object, where we define the enemy and its patrol path, which we define its patrol path. Does this get passed all the way into the state machine? It does. It gets directly passed in, and then we just give it that path as a list of tiles. Could we not do the exact same thing? And rather than just have a patrol script, have some sort of... I guess we need to determine terms. Like, what is this going to be? This is going to be really, it's going to be abilities. It's going to be asking the enemy to perform an ability, whether that's an attack or some animation sequence. It's going to be performing an ability on some cadence. Either every turn or every so many turns, it's going to try to do this. And so if I'm thinking about this in terms of the metaphor of theatrics, like this is a vignette moment in which the enemy is doing a scripted behavior, maybe that's just the right thing to call this. This is like a scripted... I want to say scripted behavior, but scripted behavior is such a loaded couple of terms in terms of like they're overloaded. Like scripting is like, you know, obviously language scripting, and behavior is a bunch of different things in terms of like the enemy setup. So I'm trying to think if there's, because it's going to be following a script. Like it feels like, you know, a little bit of clashing because I'm taking a theater metaphor, but I think this makes sense to me. So maybe we do just call this maybe this is an ability script. So it's a series of abilities it's going to try and perform. Sure. Okay. And then what is the patrol path? This is just a list of points that we define to say what pathing we want this enemy to take. Like right now it's just pathing to the same spot over and over again. Sure. Probably because I set this up in a way that it needs an actual valid path list and I didn't want it moving. So then if we add this ability script, this is going to be essentially a list of abilities. But we're also going to want some sort of additional logic. Okay, one step at a time, Tolly. Let's take this one step at a time. So we're going to need more functionality than this. I definitely am going to want to have some extra logic for how often to play the ability, the sequencing, potentially other information about it that might want to be stored and passed along. But for the time being, let's just say it's a list of abilities. And even more so, I think it's probably fair to say that these abilities aren't going to be the full prefabs, because abilities are like a pretty large chunk of information. I don't really want to be passing an entire ability class. Usually these units have abilities just added to their prefab by default, but that's not true of the player. The player container has no abilities in it at all, and I spawn those ability prefabs? Question mark face? Loaded abilities. Yes. Okay. Right. We looked at some of this stuff last week. So we actually refactored this a little bit during the week as well, because I was complaining last weekend that this logic was copy and pasted in two different locations, and I have since made a helper function so that it is just in one spot. But yeah, we essentially instantiate the abilities that the player will end up using, and then, you know, hooking all that information up correctly. So I suppose in this situation, because we don't want to add the special abilities we're going to be adding to this boar for every boar, it's only for this specific one in this cutscene moment, I kind of want to explore doing something similar. And in reality, it'd be nice if all of these abilities are not hard-coded into the prefab, but are just generated. Maybe a little overkill, but let's start with, at the very least, this not being a list of abilities, but I think this is going to be a list of ability IDs. And so these will be a series of strings that we'll pass from the spawner into the faux state machine in the exact same way we do for the patrol paths. And then this will want a reference to our new ability script. Which it will then pass along in the same way. Now, what it does with that information, I'm not entirely sure yet, but I do like this direction. So let's... I'm jumping around a whole bunch today, chat. Sorry for that if this is a little bit more confusing, but we're kind of figuring it out as we go. So we've got this ability script. It's going to be on this component. We're going to pass this information into the faux state machine. The faux state machine is then going to use that information somehow to instantiate some special abilities, and then it's going to try and perform those abilities essentially until combat starts. And then when combat starts, we're going to go into our normal combat state and let the normal combat systems take over. How do we normally naming convention our abilities? IT ability and then the name of the ability. So in this situation, we would have something like IT ability and it would perform a playful attack, which is going to be a special ability we'll set up for the AI. Let's assume we can repurpose... Sorry. What are we currently using for our normal attack? This green one? This is just AI attack, which I'm going to make sure is this one in this folder structure. Okay. So if we give this an addressable ID... Actually, I'm going to make a new copy of it, because we're probably going to end up modifying it to make it special. And we're going to call this AI Playful Attack. And then on that scripted, what did we say we wanted to give it the ID of? We're going to give it this ID. And I think I'm going to make a new subfolder. I don't remember. This is maybe the problem with naming the state theatrical, if I can't spell theatrical. But I guess I'll learn by the time we're done setting up this system. So these will be theatrical abilities, and we'll put playful attack in that folder, just to separate it out from the other ones. These should also be categorized at some point as well, but we'll start with this. Okay, so now we have this ability, which is basically just the normal attack, and it has been given this addressable ID. And we are going to reference it here inside of this ability script component. And when we set up the enemy, we can pass this ability script value into here, drag this reference in. And I guess we need to figure out how we're going to load that. So inside of the state machine now, we're going to need to loop through these IDs. And we're going to need to instantiate them the same way that we do for the player. So for the player, we mostly just do an addressable call. Technically speaking, this should probably actually be handled by the dungeon player or the dungeon enemy manager, because it's in charge of keeping track of reference counts for all of our addressable loading. And this chooses to spawn the enemies. Here. And then it initializes the state machine here. How does the player manager do this? When we say spawn the player, we load through and spawn all the abilities. And then when load count is equal to 1, then we spawn the player itself. So basically we have to spawn the abilities and then spawn the player. And we save each ability in a loaded list of abilities. And I'm going to guess we pass that in when we spawn the player. This is easier to do for the player than for the enemies, though, because we only have to worry about one player object. I'm going to write some bad code. I feel like I can get away with just loading these abilities inside of the faux state machine for today, but it will need to be broken out and be handled by the dungeon enemy manager, because it should be in control of telling the game when it's done loading all of its addressable objects, and the player should then be able to load in and everything else should be able to continue to function. By putting it inside of the faux state machine, we're kind of throwing the addressable loading to the wind, and we don't know when it'll be done, and we might get to a point where the player has somehow managed to get to that enemy and loaded it up before it's finished loading the abilities, which is going to cause some really bad problems. But again, I think for today, we might be able to get away with just loading directly inside of the state machine. So we're going to give that a shot. If it breaks, then I'll have to do the larger refactor, but let's just steal this chunk of code. And we're going to put this here. We're going to use the ability ID, which is really the ability prefab ID, because we're not checking a design data for that ability. We are just loading the prefab directly. And then normally we run this spawn ability function, which is mostly in charge of populating some of the ability's information, which isn't going to be as necessary for us in this situation. Yeah, should be fine. So I think we just need to grab the object's ability component, because we're going to want to hold on to that for executing it. And then we're going to want a list of loaded abilities in a similar way, I think. And we're going to store that inside of the state machine. This is bad for a number of reasons, but again, we'll eventually refactor this. I just want to see if we can get something functional today and see if I even like this direction before we commit a ton of time and energy to perfecting it. Okay, so we're going to go through the list of abilities, we're going to load them up, and we're going to save them in this list of loaded abilities. If this value / component is not equal null. Else, we will do our normal patrol state. So in this case, I think we might be able to get away with going directly into the theatrical state instead of the normal patrol state. I can think of a couple of issues, but I'm going to say this is fine. Okay, so I was originally thinking that we would need to have something on the cutscene itself. We looked at this a while ago, and I was saying that this would be where we would trigger the entering of theatrical state. But I think, having explored how we're going to send the data through, I do like this idea of just automatically entering into a theatrical state if we find that we have an ability script. And then I'm going to want to be able to access this loaded abilities from within the theatrical state. If we're here, this has the concept of owner, which is going to be the state machine. Yeah, I guess, again, I'm trying to keep this habit of, like, let's not build it perfect, let's just get it working. This is going to be the fastest way, is just make it public but hidden from the inspector. And then inside of the theatrical state, what happens if we just decide that our next plan of attack is the next ability? We'll need to keep track of what our quote-unquote current ability is. So if we do index, that can be equal to 0. And index can be equal to 0 each time we enter into this state. And then when we come into our internal update, we can loop through our... No, we don't even need to loop. We can just check our owner's loaded ability at current index. If index is greater than the count of this list, then set index back to 0. And we just want to increment the index here. Once we have the ability, we just want to play it, I think. How does the attack work? How do we populate a next ability? Inside of the system here, we come up with a plan of attack. It looks like we just use the telegraphed attack, which we set up a turn before, or when they next need to plan. And from here, we are checking mostly to see whether or not the enemy is stunned, but otherwise we use our attack pattern system to determine which ability we want to perform next. Let's look at the base one. Here's a simple example of populating a plan of attack. We say that it's populated. We give information on whether or not it's stationary. We basically just give it a ability, and then we have some other information about how long it'll take to perform this action. Or how many turns. Okay, so if we just steal all of this information, and we say that our next plan of attack is equal to a new plan of attack, and we set up as much of this as makes sense, I think this just works. I suppose are we reinventing the wheel a little bit here? I'm wondering, let's take a look at how a plan of attack works. It's possible a plan of attack is just what we should be using in this situation, because it essentially is just a list of different actions that can be performed with the metadata and a reference to a given ability. It is a direct reference. But that's only because of this being the type of picker that we have. Minimized one too many windows. Because this already has the ability to have the actions be ordered. It doesn't have all the data I would want, but maybe this is a better starting point than reinventing the wheel. Okay, let's see if what I have works first, but I have an inkling that we might want to replace all of this setup here with a attack plan and just use the attack plan as our script, basically. It won't be giving attacks, so it'll be a little weird from a naming perspective, but essentially it'll be a list of abilities that we would like to perform in a specific sequence. So that could be something as simple as like move to this tile, then move to this tile, then attack the enemy. Or whatever kind of scripted kind of moment we want to create. Do we have to define targets? We do. Interesting. There's some problems with this setup. Preferred distance. Can this be defaulted to something? It is -1, so we'll leave that alone. Telegraphed crystal, I don't think we care about. We can leave that as gray. The CT count, I don't think that matters in this situation, because we're going to assume each of these happens immediately for the time being. We don't need to worry about the ability being equal to null, because in this setup that shouldn't be possible, and this should have a valid override. Okay, cool. So once we set up this plan of attack, and we've populated it with the next ability in our list, and we've set the target type to foe, I'm assuming this goes up to the state machine. Yeah, and then the state machine does some work to try and say, okay, your plan is that you want to attack with this ability, and it's in charge of figuring out the nearest enemy of that type and doing a bunch of work to essentially fill in some more information about that plan of attack that we then finally use to generate a sequence for the enemy to perform during its turn. So I guess the problem here is we don't want this to necessarily be set up in the same way. Where's the starting point for this? Here, find this function. Oh, these things are used inside of the attack state. The owner just hangs on to them. So after it's telegraphed, it's set up its telegraphed attack as the next thing it wants to do, as long as there is an ability associated with it, then it's going to do this additional logic to fill in some more information. And if all that fails, then this is the default information we must hand in. Okay. So in theory, we can ignore all those additional functions, and we can just say our move location is our own location, our fire location is going to be our own location, and our attack location direction will be our current direction. Okay. That might be enough information for the AI director to actually perform this ability, which is what we're trying to get to. We're trying to get to the point where this ability will be performed. Okay, so here's where we plan our next attack. We say update our current state, which in this situation would grab the current ability, set it as our next plan of attack if we're in this theatrical mode that we're setting up. As long as that plan of attack is not null, which it shouldn't be, then we are going to set ourselves as the unit, which is fine. We are going to set a target tile, which is going to be a move location, which in the theatrical setup we have right now, that's always going to be our own tile. We're not going to move. We may eventually add more functionality, but for the time being, that should work. Our destination becomes that target tile. We're going to try and navigate to it, which is fine. We're not going to be stunned, I don't think, unless somehow combat has started, in which case some weirder things are happening. We're going to then try and move to that location. Again, all of this should be invalid because we're saying we want to move to where we already are, so all of this should get skipped. And then we're finally going to check to make sure our ability is not null. And if it's not, we're going to set it up as the thing we want to perform. Yeah, I think this all should just work. Fingers crossed. Hydration redeem from Magnus. Hope you're doing well on this Sunday. Okay. In theory, this should do something, or at the very least, we should get some fun bugs that we can start to work through. Yeah, let's hit play. Let's see how this breaks. What did I miss? What am I not thinking about? Well, at this point, there is no immediate errors. So if we look for the boar, which should be spawned, just not revealed, and we look underneath of it, we do not see the playful attack, which we set up. That may be because we don't actually call initialize on this. until it's revealed. Nope, that can't be the case. Yeah, we should have hit this chunk of code. Okay, let's debug it. And before we go any further of actually revealing it, I just want to see what's going on here, because this is the first problem. Oh, it's possible that we're not assigning the enemy as a parent object? Yeah, we are not. Yeah, we did load it. It did get added to an array, but if we look for playful, yes, it is here, but it is just at the bottom of the scene hierarchy because we did not add its game object underneath of this faux state machine. So we should be able to do game object.set. No, opposite. We want to do object.transform.set parent to this object's transform, which the this is redundant, but I typed what I said. All right, cool. So that should fix that part. Again, minimize too many times. And that should have it so the attack should be underneath of the enemy. Technically, this isn't required in order to test whether or not it works, but I want to fix this as we go. Okay, it's loaded. We see that it's here, and it is now correctly underneath the boar. So now if we step forward, trigger the cutscene, the adventurer spawns, the boar spawns. We are not in combat, but we did get a crash. And that is because the index is out of bounds. All right, not sure how that code I wrote looks fine. The value should be 0. Goes through, and then it should be 1, and then it should be... Oh, is it just an equal sign? I think I see the problem in my head. I think I see what I did wrong. But we'll just take a look at it in debugger real quick. We'll take a step. We find that first ability that we set up. We increment index to 1. And yeah, it needs to be greater than or equal to in this context. Cool. And then the primary issue is that the attack isn't going to have a target. In this setup, we will not have chosen a tile for the playful attack to hit, or a unit for the playful attack to hit. So I think it will try and perform the ability, but then will fail because it didn't find a unit. Yeah, so it's silently failing right now. Ooh, we also get an animation pop. I don't believe the animation popping was happening before we spawned the boar, so it is adding 1 extra frame somehow, is my guess. Let's see if it's still popping here. No, everything works fine here, and we do not get any animation frame popping. So it is not performing the action because it doesn't have a valid target. And it is also causing there to be a 1 frame delay before the player gets to put their input in again. Okay. Let's take a look at the playful action first. So this is an AI hit effect. Which this system works a little differently from the player's attack types. The player attack uses a effect-driven ability effect, The AIs are still using full ability of area effect, which is requiring that there be an enemy within its attack area. Okay. I think the easier solution is going to not have this be treated like a normal AI attack, but instead treat it more like a player attack, in which it's going to try and locate something in front of it and try to attack that thing. And it's not going to require that I pass in a specific target. Just going to change this one to be the ID that we're going to be loading instead. So this is a player-driven attack, which is set up a little bit differently. It has an initial ability, which I think I can clear. What happens if it doesn't have an initial ability? It's not going to try and execute it. Perfect. Okay, so then from there, we should be able to turn this chunk of code off. And then this will only execute the effects part, which is assigned here. Now, we should be able to clean this up. There's a bunch of extra logic in here that we shouldn't need. We can do wait on idle. That can get turned back on in this situation. And then instead of doing this animation speed setup, because that relies on the initial, we should be able to turn back on this piece of functionality instead. Okay. So this is going to try and find a unit by tile offset, which is going to be an offset of 0, 1, which is directly in front of the enemy. And because the boar is currently spawning with a facing that's looking towards the NPC, this attack should find the NPC. This ability is going to make sure that we're facing towards the target, which is unnecessary but fine. It's going to do a little bit of movement. Is going to try and perform a slash ability animation, which we do not have. So if we take a look in here, what animation do we normally do for the AI? It normally does melee 1, so we're going to try and bring that over. We're going to use that as the animation that we're going to trigger. All of this should still work correctly. We're going to do some animations, some particles. We shouldn't need to do anything with the combo system or the combo system's power setter. We shouldn't need to do anything with adjusting power stagger power. We shouldn't need to grant ourselves any experience because this is an enemy, so all of that can get turned off. Same thing with all of this information. This is all to do with granting experience. That branch can be turned off. Same with this branch. Apply stagger can be turned off. And for our purposes, this is a playful attack. I think we can turn off apply damage, so it's not going to actually hurt the NPC in this situation. Then from there, calculate is fine, hit is fine. I believe everything else here should work. Miss is going to be a bit awkward. I think we can do a similar kind of setup here. Yeah, we're going to want to grab the slash effect, and we're going to put that in here instead of the animation speed. I'm going to just rename this real quick for my own sanity to make sure that we are clear that we are not playing slash, but we are actually calling melee 1. The rename isn't required for my system, but again, clarity helps. Defeat, miss, and then we don't need this branch because this has to do with experience and combo setup. And that all seems fine. Okay, now, if we go back to the AI system, things that the AI system is doing that we are not is setting up a parry check. And then it is also going to do a custom hit notification for parry. This is assigning the parry parameter if it finds the defender has the parry status effect. We want this for sure, because the NPC is currently set up to have the parry status effect always by default. So we're going to want to put this in here. But what is this parry check doing? It's making sure that we don't do the damage stuff if the enemy's parried. We don't do the miss. Oh, we do apply stagger. And apparently this response, with unique message parry, is what's actually doing the parry effect. Okay, so if we come in here and drop that component in, drag that up to here, I think technically based off of all of that, we should be able to turn off calculate damage and calculate miss entirely. And all we care about is this setup. In fact, we don't even necessarily have to do the parry check, and we could remove the auto generation of the parry status effect, and we could just say this ability does all the particle stuff, but then just plays the parry hit notification. Because this is all for fun anyways, so we can just bake it directly into the attack. I'm fine leaving the miss, because this is a situation in which we told it to attack a specific direction, and there was nothing there. Okay, I think that might work, but the ability system is somewhat complex, so it may cause us more problems as we actually try and implement it. In terms of this system, when it tries to perform the actual planned attack, it is hard-coded to try and find the area effect ability and then get tiles within it, find a unit, and then perform that ability with those targets. So in this situation, again, we're going to hack some stuff together, because we're going to get it working first, and then we'll find a better way to do it. If we find that there is no area effect on here, but instead that we find there is a ability, there's a lot of ability components. Ability effect. Ability effect. Area? No. Ability area. What is the name of that component? We can look at here. Effect-driven ability area. Ability effect-driven. Why am I not finding that? Effect-driven. Because, yeah, I'm still adding ability to the front of it. Okay, there we go. So find this instead. what do we do from that? If we go to the ability select screen, what do we normally do for a player? Because that's what we're going to be treating this more like. Get the abilities. This all gets sent over to the actual target select. And we tell it to perform with the area effects ability targets. How do those get generated? When we open the screen, we tell the area effect to init the UI, which does some setup. But where does this information get populated to? Whoa, okay. Oh, where was I looking just now? Oh, I was looking at the base class. Okay, yeah, so effect-driven ability effect, when we call init UI, is going to do a bunch of work predicting the ability with the unit's current direction and the current tile that the unit is on, and then determine whether or not it's valid through some hacky stuff, but that's fine. Okay, so that all being said, we should just be able to do a init UI, which is a weird call in this context, but that should give us the information we need. And then similar to the targeting system, we should be able to see whether or not any target was found to be valid. Wait. This is checking against a area, not an effect area. Does that mean that it should be able to be set up either way? When we look at the full ability area, does this also set up a list of ability targets? It does. Okay. So then I think... Oh, am I just... Oh, I'm overcomplicating this. I think this just works out of the box. Not quite. I'm constructing the targets manually here in this system, but I think all I need to do is the same init UI call, and whether or not it's a full area effect or an effect-driven area, it should populate the targets correctly. Why was I doing this instead of using the automatic system? I'm going to assume it's because I didn't want to do any of the actual board deselecting tile stuff. Interesting. I'm going to try it. Let's see what's broken about doing it this way. But in theory, this should make things simpler. So from here, if we use this screen as a reference, once we've initialized it, then we need to do a similar kind of thing here to make sure that there are valid targets, which was essentially what we were doing here. What was the list of targets? A list of ability targets? Whereas this would have been the same content. So then could we just do targets is equal to its internal ability targets? The step we're missing here is checking to see whether or not it's valid, which is probably fine for today. Otherwise, it'll just perform it. Okay. I bet you we have to do this workaround because we have to tell it what the firing location is. Units in area, get tiles in area, get tiles in area. Yeah, it feels like it's doing something so close for the AI setup, but just different enough that I don't think this is going to work universally. That's such a shame. Okay. So re-looking at this, what is this doing? So this was grabbing the area, getting the tiles in the area, given the board instance and the planned firing location, which would be the board and a specific point. Wait, this point isn't even used in this context. So this is just returning all tiles within range, basically? Okay, now I'm even more confused. So this is just returning all tiles, and then any units in those tiles, it just categorizes those as targets, basically. Whereas if we do it this way, and we call init UI, oh, this doesn't even do anything, because this is not even... Okay. I see a path forward. So if we take this call, paste that over into here, so that this version actually does something with this override, instead of doing all of that other stuff, what if it just did the same thing that was being set up here? So we're going to have a list of targets. In this case, it will be ability targets. Those will be a list of units. It should be able to just do get tiles in area. It shouldn't need this firing area in this context. This should be able to be null. It doesn't like that. Fine. It can be a new point object that's constructed as empty. I hate that, but that's fine. Okay, and then from that list of tiles, it can just add those to the targets. Cool. So now this one is doing on its init UI call the same thing it was doing here. So now we can get rid of that. And it will get the same information at the end, a list of targets, which we will then use here. And if the targets are 0, we'll say somehow we found no targets for this attack, which whether or not that's an error is debatable. and then we will perform that ability with the targets that we found. So this means that this should still work with old AI tech and old AI ability setups, but with our new playful attack, which is set up with a full or an effect-driven ability area, it should also function, because it will go through and try to predict what the ability will do, and in doing so, construct targets for it. Okay. Let's give this a shot. Yeah. I think this should work. If it doesn't, then we're going to be in for some good archaeology to try and figure out what the heck is going on at like a deeper level. But from what I can remember of how I built this, this should work. So when we take one step here, the boar should just do an attack. It does not. We can see that it is selecting the tile that the NPC is on, so it's doing something, but it is not successfully attacking. All right, so then we're going to come into this sequence here. We are not seeing any errors, or... No, we are not seeing any errors, so it is finding valid targets, and it is trying to perform the ability on that target. Let's add an attach. So it's going to be going down through... that's fine. It's going to be going down through and coming up with a target which will be its current facing on its current tile, and valid is currently false. So that means that it didn't find a valid setup. I'm going to check can perform. It's going to go through and send some messages. Basically checking to make sure that the enemy has an FMP, and it does. It's going to say that it can perform this, so that's good. It's going to set up some stuff with power, stagger power, and some other things, which is weird because this is a player ability we're trying to put onto the enemy, but shouldn't cause any issues. We're just going to F10 through some of this stuff. All right, and then we're going to actually... Oh, I skipped over the actual perform. All right, but it did try and perform, and it basically tried to modify a MP stat by 0, which is fine. And then it's doing a wait on state idle. That's it? Those are the only two things it found to do. All right, well, that's enough for us to go off of. So it's waiting for this. Then I'm going to guess it's not finding an enemy unit. I bet... Let's put a breakpoint in here. I'm going to guess that when we go down into this, it's because I have set up the adventurer to be a foe type, so it doesn't trigger combat, and that the ability is also not going to perform because it sees it as a friend. We're going to have to remove this breakpoint for now. All right, so this is the player. This is the enemy. This is the enemy's plan. It's going to try and find a tile that is in front of itself. It's going to find the tile 1110, which should be the one that contains the NPC, and it is. So we do see the contents of that tile is the Adventurer 001. So then we get that unit as a target. If it's not null, we set that as the potential unit, and we move on. Okay. From here, we're going to go do children effects. This is the UI select, which is fine. It's going to do some predicting logic. It's finding that it is true. It's going to set some preview tiles and kind of set up our blackboard of information correctly. Do a little bit of extra work to set some of the UI stuff. And then it is going to go into the children of that one, which there were none. And then it's going to do the hit effect. Now the hit effect, conditional components, has none, so that's fine. It's expecting that we found a unit, which we do have a property saying that we did, so this will pass. It's going to calculate its chance of hitting, which right now is always 100%, I think. It's doing some messaging, checking to see if there's any automatic failures. And we get back our chance of missing as not true, so we have hit. It's doing some property setup stuff. Trying not to zone out so hard. Okay, so we're done with that. So we have done the hit effect. We're going to go in and try and modify or execute other children stuff. It's showing the name, that's fine. Facing the target. We're going to F10 through some of this stuff, head back up. Next one is selecting a tile in front of it. Branching, it's going to be trying to do some movement stuff. This all looks fine. Yeah, this is all executing correctly. I don't see a problem so far. I would have expected to see an issue sooner than this. Next one, it's doing a delay. That's a little weird. I would think that there would be some stuff in between that, but... doing some offset setting? Let's just put a breakpoint here. Add a watch. This will be faster. We got out? What happened? We definitely weren't done. Okay, so much for faster. So it definitely got to here, and it was going through this setup. We didn't see it get to this. That's kind of the next part that didn't happen. Definitely went into this part, and it definitely hit this one, so why would it not have hit this one? We are still sending through the right one. We are. I'll double check to make sure that we instantiated the correct one as well. We did. And it doesn't have anything weird with the actual instantiation. No, and we definitely got into these section here. So these were the delays we were seeing, was where it was trying to move itself. But we never saw it actually try and play the animation, it didn't look like. And it definitely missed some other effects. All right, well, I guess we'll keep digging. So we're going to move again. It's going to do some prediction stuff. Delay, offset, delay, offset. And now at this point, we've gotten kicked out. We have targets. We're coming in. We're going to try and perform the ability. We're going to attempt to perform it. Cost. That's fine. Show direction. Hit. Default distance. Found. Valid. Wait on animation idle. Damage effect. UI select. Hit effect. Miss effect. Reaction window delay. Outro. Okay. So that tells me a little bit more. It didn't get into here, which means it didn't find a valid unit. This is the problem. I knew this was going to be the problem, but I couldn't see it when we were debugging through. So in here, this can target call, is it because it's in a different setup? Here. This was happening somewhere else. Not there. Here. Okay, so basically when we hit one of those children, it basically... Once we reached that point in the code, it couldn't find a valid target because we have it set to only target enemies. And thus it didn't execute any of the code underneath. Okay. I knew that was going to be the problem. I just wanted to figure out and see it. Probably could have looked around the components and found it faster than debugging, but it's fine. It's fine. I'm not salty, chat. You're salty. It's fine. All right, so let's do... Where did we set that? Where did we set the NPC to be a... I appreciate the hydrate. Magnus, you're right. Salty, make sure you drink so that that salt doesn't dehydrate you. I appreciate it. I appreciate it, Magnus. All right, so let's see here. Where did we set... Here. Where did we set this value? At some point today, like literally today, we set this to have a state of enemy, not foe, because it's the alliance, not the target type. All right, so if we give this back an alliance of hero, and because of some other work we've done to set up, we can turn off the spot logic for now so that it won't enter into its attack state. In theory, it shouldn't enter into attack and start fighting the NPC for real, and it should be able to use its theatrical ability now and just perform that continuously. Okay, well, we're going to need to get rid of these breakpoints because they're going to hit all the time because everything is always being performed. We can turn off these ones for now. This one can go. Let's go back to this one. All right. Combat has started. That is not what we wanted to see. Let's turn on debug spawn all so that we don't have to walk up. The boar should instantly enter combat now. Okay. Why are you entering into combat? Right, because the spot effect is happening externally right now. When the enemy spawns in, as part of its intro, it's going to queue up a sequence to try and look around, basically. And that spot is happening independent of the current state we're in. So we are changing to the attack state externally. All right. Out of curiosity, if we comment this out, could we get it to look like it's working at least a little bit? Because we basically want the NPC to be treated as an enemy, but to not actually be an enemy. Well, that kind of looks like it's working. Now the question becomes, that was still delaying the player's movement. And the question now becomes, can we make that happen without delaying the player? Where do we have a branch? How do branches work? It's just called branch. Okay. So if we create a empty parent, drag all of this content inside of it, we're going to add a branch ability effect. We're going to call this branch. In theory, it should try and execute all of the attack stuff in a separate kind of thread. It's not really a thread, but you could think about it that way if it makes it easier. But it's going to happen kind of independent of the rest of the game. So it's going to kick off the enemy's action and then say, oh, and the action's immediately done on the same frame. So now, now it still doesn't work. And that is because a conditional property failed somewhere. I'm gonna sneeze. And then as soon as I go to mute, I don't need to sneeze anymore. Fantastic. All right. Did I copy a conditional effect in here? I did not. The error seems to imply that it is upset about a conditional property. Why did adding a branch cause that to fail? What is this error? Null reference inside of the conditional property. Oh, is it saying... If this is where the problem is, then it's saying that the properties component is not set? Okay, let's take a larger look at this call stack. So it's going into the ability effect. It's going into the branch multiple levels down. And at some point, one of the ability effects is checking a conditional property that is set to null. This may not be the branch I set up. Okay, out of curiosity, if we just move this back up and out of that branch, disable that branch for now, and then rerun it, does it go back to working? Oh, we're almost at the 2-hour mark. I would like to have this working before we end this particular section of the stream, but yeah, if we get rid of the branch, it goes back to working. So somehow adding a branch component at that level breaks things. Because it doesn't have a property component yet. Interesting. It might be because I've never done a branch within a branch. And I think layering branches might break stuff, is my hypothesis. Odd. Okay, let's see. Where does this properties come from? Get properties in parent. And it happens on start. And it's from the base ability effect. So any base ability effect is going to try and find a properties component. Where was the error happening specifically? Perhaps it's just not initializing it soon enough. It's happening inside of a conditional component, which is a property component which should have initialized its properties on start. Oh. That start call won't happen if the object is turned off. But normally, we don't call effects on objects that are turned off. However, in this situation, it does not look like this has a check to validate that that child component is enabled. If we look at the original setup for this inside of the ability, this does have a if child is active. I have a feeling that this concept of branching was copied before that. Sub ability perform. Does that also have a if child is active? Okay, so this bug is pretty straightforward then. It is that the branching setup did not have my extra logic to validate that we only check against active objects. Anything that's turned off is basically like debug disabled. Is that the same problem in here? It is a problem for our for loop logic, which not a lot of things use the for loop. For loops were for like basically charge effects where we want to charge forward 5 tiles, but we want to stop at some point if we find an enemy. Similar kind of idea here. So for loop ability effects also were missing that bit of logic. So while we're fixing this bug today, might as well fix it now in case we ever do use the for loop for something and I have to spend 15 minutes trying to figure out what's wrong. All right. Zoom in. Okay. So now the boar can attack as much as it wants. We still have animation popping here. We have the selecting of this UI tile, which I think we can turn off fairly easily. And then we have some null references happening as well, which I'm going to guess is that we only have a limited number of particle effects that we spawn at any given moment because we don't think we need that many. And we are attacking fast enough to use up our entire pool of particles. Is likely that problem. All right, so in here, if we turn off UI select tile as an effect, I think that'll turn off the targeting of the blue tile underneath the NPC's feet. Nope, still doing it. Okay, well that's fine. That might be the initialize UI call that we're using now inside of the AI ability sequence step. Maybe. It doesn't look like this should actually be doing anything with the tiles, though. It's probably embedded one of the other ability effects are doing some extra logic to highlight that it shouldn't. I can track that down. But what's going on with the null references? We've got 48 of them. Yeah, it's all trying to allocate objects and we don't have enough of them. So out of curiosity, for particles, we have particle pools and we have some attack particles here. Yeah, we only have 2. Yeah, it's using this one here. And if we move too quick, it ends up using both of them, and they're both lasting long enough that we run out of particles in our pool. Easy solution there is to just add an extra particle or a couple extra particles, but the other option is maybe that boar shouldn't be attacking as frequently. So this would be where we start to look at advancing the logic inside of the ability script, where instead of this just being a single ability ID, it has like, oh, perform this ability, then wait 3 turns, and then perform another ability. Something like that would probably help with reducing the amount of spam, and also would look better because then the enemy wouldn't be continuously attacking as we're moving, and would give a little bit more information for this to read. But this is still a fair amount of hacking the code together in order to get this working. But besides the errors, technically this is doing what I want, which is playing pretend that combat is happening, when in reality, combat isn't actually active. Okay. Okay, we're gonna take our break for dinner. First time chatter in Twitch chat, though. Let's see if I can answer your question before we call it. How do you spawn an object in game? I have a bunch of meshes that form a character, but I want the game to import it. I tend to use addressables. So if we, for example, take a look at our pooling tech, I'll run the game. I like using addressables personally. It's a bit of a learning curve to get your head wrapped around them, but you can just do instantiate object would also be another way you could do it. But see if I can find an example. I tend to use addressables.instantiate async, which is maybe more complicated than what you're looking for. You could probably just use addressables.instantiate, but that would be the thing I would look into, is the keyword addressables. But again, you can also just do, if you want even simpler, you can do gameObject.instantiate. And then if you just give it a reference to a game object, which could be like a prefab in your project, you could also instantiate that way as well. If I'm making the core game script, how can I find the objects under the game objects? If I had one called hat. A couple of ways. Most people suggest not doing this, but you could create a new component called hat, and then you could do some lookup stuff where you do find component hat in children, or find component hat in parent, depending on where you're searching from, and then it will give you back the reference to hat if it found one. Otherwise, it'll give you back null. So for example, if I go into, let's just write in here, if I wanted to, I could do get component tile. This will find the component on the object, but you could do get component in child, and this will find any components of that type underneath the current object that the script is attached to. Is there a workspace-like variable, like workspace.hat? Not familiar with that term. So can't help you on that one. As a general rule, though, it's worth noting get component is quite expensive because it has to search through all the objects. The easier way would be, potentially, if you know what you're instantiating, you could just keep a reference to the object after you instantiated in the script. So after you instantiate the object, you can have a reference to it. So gameObject.instantiate. I believe this returns an object type, and you could keep a reference of that object. Although it might be better to do it as a game object, which I think you can do. I'd need to look into that further, but I think you can do that and then you instantiate as game object. Does that work? I don't think that works. Because I want to make a thing like in Roblox, how you can have class instantiate.new class name and then put it in game objects. I am not familiar with Roblox or its coding setup, so I can't help you in terms of like adapting it from that work experience to Unity. But I will say that there are really good Unity tutorials and also secondhand tutorials. I'm not sure if I can give you all the information you need though. As a general rule, just for future notice as well, I'm usually just deep in my own systems that are pretty elaborate and hard to explain, and I don't tend to spend a ton of time breaking stuff down. But that being said, always willing to try and answer questions if I can, but I am going to say that I probably can't fully help you, not without dedicating a large amount of time to it. Because I think at a base level, there's some fundamental stuff with Unity that you kind of need to dig into. I can briefly go over that, but then we are gonna break for dinner. I use the Unity animator system. I tend to just fire off a event. So if I click on my character, it is constantly looping through idle. But if I click the dizzy trigger, it will trigger that animation and then automatically exit out of it. That's all handled via the transition systems that checks to see like what transitions are set up. This looks crazy, but that's because I auto-generate this from script. So all of these connections and transitions are all built through an Asprite editor that imports everything. Asprite being a 2D program or 2D art application. But essentially I set up a bunch of transitions. In terms of how that actually works in code, I can show on the player. I essentially have an animation component that I've created that does a call to the animator, and then I do stuff like animator.setTrigger or animator set bool, and then when these values are being set, similar to me doing it kind of in debug here, it checks to see whether or not that condition has been met for that animation, and then it'll auto transition. I'm currently using all of my animations from any state. So basically any state can transition to any other state. This is probably a bad way to set it up, but this is the way that I have done it because it makes the most sense to me. Is there a signal fired when an animation has stopped? There is not by default, to my understanding. The way that I have done that is very specific, but for each of my animations, I have added a event that you can add. So you can right click and add animation events to your animation track. I have added an animation event called animation complete, and then I have a function that it tries to call called process animation event. If we take another look at the player setup, the player has a script on its sprite renderer, which has the animator. Am I a liar? Oh, it gets added at runtime. I add the component at some point, I think from this animation script. One second. If I go back to that, here, click here, grab this process animation event call. It doesn't have to be called this. I just named it something generic. But if I have this very simple script called animation event receiver that just has this function, and it'll try and find this component on the animator, and that event will get called. And so I basically have set it up so every single one of my animations have this animation complete string function call that will get called by that, where'd I go? Here, will get called by this component that I add to the animator. And then that way I post an event basically to say that this animation has stopped with this string, or more accurately, I say that this animation has hit this animation event with this string, and then I have a bunch of different spots where I listen for animation complete. And then just to quickly validate what I'm saying, inside of animations. Yeah, I just didn't see it. Inside of the init call, I add the animation event receiver to the animator game object. I feel like all of this information, like given randomly, isn't going to really help you though. I will call that out. I'm trying to answer to the best of my abilities, but a lot of this stuff you could probably find a focus tutorial on. Hopefully I gave you some keywords or some other terms that you could dig into. I'm not going to say that what I'm doing is the best though, but it is the way that I'm most comfortable doing it. Cool. I'm going to call it there though. We'll be back in 2 hours, closer to an hour and 50. For new folks, we stream on Sundays from 2 to 4 PST, and then from 6 to 8 PST. I take a 2-hour break for dinner basically, and then come back and continue from usually wherever we left off before. And I try and stream every Sunday. Cool. I don't have a ton of time to be a mentor. I am sad to say. There is a Discord channel, but I usually don't have a ton of time to answer questions in there either. Just a little bit of my background. I have worked as a video game programmer / designer / tech designer, whatever term makes the most sense at any given time, honestly, but for about 15 years, primarily working in Unity for a good chunk of that. Oh god, it might be like 16 or 17 years now. But yeah, usually these streams are me just kind of brain dumping myself, just trying to solve problems, because I find just talking on stream tends to have me be very productive, but it is not tutorial content. That is just not something I do super well, especially when it comes to coding. Hopefully that makes sense. Again, I'm going to stop though. I got to go get dinner. I will be back in about an hour and 45 minutes now. For now though, this will be Tolhi signing out. Later folks.